thank you for logging on with us today. I'm Natasha Mitchell and I'm one of the paralegals within the immigration team. Just to let everyone know, today's webinar is recorded and should be on the website in the following days in case you need to rewatch it and relearn anything. So I'm joined by Louis, who's head of our immigration department, director and co-owner of Truth Legal. Most of you probably know Louis through your work here, and as I'm sure you can agree, with 16 years experience working exclusively within immigration law, he is an expert in this field. So today we're going to be joined by the statement of changes to the care sector, importantly, how you can stay compliant in these challenging times. It should be noted there will be a Q&A at the end of the session, so if you have any questions not answered in the presentation today, there will be an opportunity to ask Louis later. So Louis, what changes have the reform brought for the care sector?
Thank you, Natasha. Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's well. Thanks again for joining us. The reason I wanted to do this, or that we wanted to do this webinar, was because, as most of you presumably know, there's been these major changes in July, which have really changed the scope of who can be sponsored. That alongside, there's been we've seen a clampdown by the Home Office in terms of suspensions and revocations. So it really felt like a timely time to be giving a bit of an update, a kind of legal update on key things to know about and key things to be aware of as well in terms of compliance. So, but yeah, to answer your question, Natasha, the big news is that obviously, or maybe not obviously, but in July, the remit of who can be sponsored changed significantly. So the headline was that new care workers can't be sponsored from overseas, but I would stress that the changes to bar new care workers being sponsored from overseas. Mm-hmm. Care workers can, I'll just go back 1 second, sorry, yeah, care workers can still be sponsored if they're already in the UK. So that's the big thing, is sponsorship of care workers is actually still fine, but you just have to be they have to be in the UK, and they have to meet one of two conditions that we'll talk about in a moment. Okay, so that's the key thing to be aware of. So, and this period we've now entered since July 25 is known as a transition period, which is going on until 22nd of July 2028.
Okay, so with that in mind, is it still possible to recruit migrant workers? Is it all doom and gloom? Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so really, there has been a lot of doom and gloom, and I feel like there's been some kind of messaging that sponsorship of care workers is no longer possible, but that really isn't the case at all. It's true that you can no longer sponsor from overseas, like I've said, but you can still sponsor from within the UK. And you just have to be really careful that if you're sponsoring someone new, so I'm not talking about anyone who is already being sponsored by you, they can just be extended as you need, but I'm talking about bringing in brand new, either care workers or senior care workers. So they have to be meeting one of these two criteria. So this is really the big change. This is one, I kind of got a few key slides. So this is a key slide. Whenever you're sponsoring someone, they have to be meeting one of these two criteria. So the first option is that the person you want to sponsor is already sponsored elsewhere as a care worker or a senior care worker, and they're switching sponsorship to you as a care worker again. So, you've got Joe Bloggs who's working at another care home. He's wanting to change employer to you. That is still permitted. Okay, so that's your first option. The second option is if the individual's already been working for you for 3 months on a different visa route. Okay, so I've given the example here of someone who, it could be any visa where you have a right to work, but it could be someone on a graduate route visa. It's quite a common situation. They've worked for you for 3 months on their graduate route visa. You can then take them up under sponsorship. Okay, there's just a couple of things to be aware of. So the key thing is that the individual has to have completed 3 months of work for you on their alternative visa route before you assign the cause. Okay, the certificate of sponsorship, that is. So just make sure they've got the 3 months under their belt working for you before you assign the cause. It's not before they submit the visa application, it's before you assign the cause to them. And I'll talk in a moment about the kind of information the Home Office now expect to see to justify how anyone you're sponsoring as a care worker is meeting one of those two criteria. And just the last thing I'll say on this slide is that this option, the option to have someone work for you for 3 months, is available until 22nd of July 2028. So there's still a good nearly 3 years to go of being able to use this option.
All right, perfect. So what are some practical tips for some employers then to help them continue with migrant sponsorship?
Okay, so yeah, I guess the focus is going to be, as ever, on employee retention so that you're not needing to have as many hires. But again, just to sort of emphasize what I said on the slide before, you do not have until July 2028 before this route is completely closed down. So there is an argument to kind of make hay while the sun shines, kind of thing. You can. There was in March, the Home Office made a really big deal about this displaced worker pool and this very kind of complicated arrangement where you had to first try and hire from what they call the displaced pool of workers before you could bring anyone in for overseas sponsorship. Now that's all actually been made redundant because you can't bring anyone over from overseas anyway. Nonetheless, there is still a large pool of, as you'll probably know, displaced workers. So people who have, for one reason or another, no longer got sponsorship. So that could be problems with a sponsor, losing its license, or problem with a business. Often, normally, I'd say it's not the fault of the individual. So though there is still a large number of people who can be taken on under that first condition, which is them switching sponsorship from someone else to you. Actually, are we taking questions as we go along, Natasha, or are we leaving it till the end?
We've got a Q&A at the end. There's a slide on it then.
Yeah.
Right at the end.
Yeah. So if I know someone just put their hand up, like at school, but I mean, if you could save that question till the end, that would be appreciated. Okay. Yeah, some other tips is to consider advertising to students and graduates. So this would be to come in under the second criteria, which is getting someone to work for you for 3 months. Now, the 3 months could be part-time. It doesn't have to be full-time. And part-time, I'm thinking students who can work part-time during term time, or graduates, meaning people who are on the graduate route visa. There is a bonus from your business point of view to sponsoring a student, because if you sponsor a student, you don't have to pay the immigration skills charge, which for a small business is $364 per year, or for a medium or large business is £1,000 a year. So there is a financial incentive, a business case, shall we say, to sponsor people on a student visa. Yeah, and you can. The reason why I think these options aren't so bad is because many businesses would want to kind of try someone out for 3 months anyway before they sponsor them. So it actually could kind of dovetail with your business needs to have someone prove themselves, for example, in the graduate route visa or whatever visa they're on for 3 months, and then you kind of go, yeah, like the look at them, we can sponsor them now.
So with everything changing, is the sponsorship process any different than it was before?
So it's top level still the same. So you still need a certificate of sponsorship, and you still need to assign that certificate of sponsorship to the individual. But there is a whole new section of guidance about the information that you need to include on the cause. Now, appreciate this is getting down into the weeds, could be quite dry, but I'd say this is probably the most important slide of this presentation that I wanted to get across. So this is, if you're now post-July going to be sponsoring a care worker, you have to include this information or they'll just reject the request. So we've seen lots of rejections where this information isn't being included. You know, as you'll know, you can wait up to 18 weeks to get your cause request through. So it's a disaster if you've waited all that time and then they reject it on a technicality because you've not included relevant information. So There is now information that you have to include, and it's both when you're applying for a cause and or assigning a cause. Okay. When you're applying for a cause, there's just a large text box with 2,000 character count. So you have to find a way of fitting in all the relevant information they now want to see. So they obviously still need to know the personal information, immigration status of who they are, and all the same information as before, like the job title, summary job description. But they also want to know, well, the working locations, and that, again, if you're requesting a cause, you'll have to input that into the text box. You'll have to input your CQC registration number, or what the equivalents for Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland. And then this is another key thing is how the individual care worker now meets the new eligibility requirements, one of those two conditions that I talked about. And so the kind of suggested wording is if they've done their work for you for 3 months, you should say that they've been working for you since X whenever they started employment. And you should actually, that should be expanded on a bit to say that they've therefore worked for you for over 3 months. Okay. And you should confirm what their current permission to stay is, like they're on a graduate route, student visa, whatever. Or if they are switching sponsorship as a care worker to you, you would say the worker was last granted permission as a skilled worker to work as a care worker, and they're now switching to you under code 6135, which is the care worker code, or 6136. And the guidance does say that you should now include their current cause number if they're switching sponsorship. And just to emphasize again that this information must now be going to the Home Office, either that's through a cause request or when you're assigning the cause. And when you assign the cause, you've got an option of either including this information in the summary job description, or you can add it afterwards as a sponsor note. So you've got to make sure you're getting the information across through one of those ways. If you don't do it, they will reject your cause request.
All right, thank you for that, Louis. So I'm sure many people logging on today are really worried about staying compliant with these new changes. What are some things that people should know or look out for to make sure they're properly operating within the law?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mentioned before that sponsor license compliance is now more important than ever, I'd say, because the Home Office is really cracking down on care providers and really looking to find any possible fault, sometimes finding faults when there aren't any. So you do need to really be whiter than white. So I'm going to talk about some general principles here, and then the next slide, I'll dive into a few more specific points. But the first point on compliance, particularly relevant to what we're talking about today, is just make sure you're only ever sponsoring someone now if they're meeting one of those two conditions. So either they've worked for you for 3 months on an alternative visa route, or they are changing sponsorship from care worker at another place to being a care worker at your place. Another general point I'd say is right to work checks. The Home Office is particularly obsessed about right to work checks at the moment. It can be an up to £60,000 fine if you've not carried out a proper right to work check and someone's working for you illegally, or £45,000. I think £45,000 first time, but if you do it again, it's 60,000. So if you look at every month, they name and shame all employers who've had right to work fines. It's insane. There's businesses which are getting fined over £300,000 fines for having, I guess, multiple people working for them without the right to work. So there's the fine side of stuff, but there's also the fact now, if you're not doing all the checks perfectly, they will use that as a basis to take away your license. So even if someone actually does have the right to work, so there's no issue that they're actually working illegally, but you've just not done the checks properly, it can't be a basis to get the £45,000 fine, but it can be a basis to have your license suspended and or revoked. So make sure you're doing that right. I would still encourage you to be seen to be making a good fist of trying to recruit through the domestic workforce. Okay. And that would include evidencing your advertising, evidencing your selection process. For example, keeping a record of who's applied. You could have a selection matrix, so why someone's been rejected or why they make it through for an interview. Make sure you're keeping a copy of your interview notes. Okay, you just want to have a really transparent basis to show why you've gone overseas, why you've gone for an overseas care worker, or for a care worker, why you've gone to sponsor a care worker, rather than employ a British person or someone who doesn't need sponsorship. The one sort of bit of good news, I suppose, or the one bit of not bad news in July was that although the thresholds went up enormously for almost every other type of job. So, for example, now to sponsor most non-sort of health roles, you're talking about having to pay over 41,000. But the minimum salary requirements for care workers did remain the same. So you need to be guaranteeing that the package you provide hits at least 25,000 and that the hourly rate does not fall below £12.82. So I think you could have £12.82 at 37.5 hours, and that would just about be bang on 25,000. One other thing I want to talk about is this area of what's called either additional work or supplementary employment. So you may be aware that individuals who are sponsored elsewhere can do up to 20 hours with your business without being sponsored. Okay. And there's been a bit of kind of debate around whether the person who's doing the additional work for you, so you're working at, you're involved with company A, someone's working at company B, is sponsored at company B, but that person is doing additional work up to 20 hours a week with you at company A. Now, something that comes up a lot in the kind of care sector is, well, what happens if the person who's sponsored at company B loses their employment, but is still has a valid visa? And I know there's been a bit of confusion over whether or not they can work for you. So my view is actually it's been fairly clear all along, and that they're not allowed to work for you, unfortunately. It is a requirement of the rules that to do supplementary employment with you, they still need to be doing their main job. And just to sort of hammer that home, there has been a recent decision in the upper tribunal which has just clarified that. So just be careful if you're taking on someone under additional work. You should really be getting evidence that they are still doing their main sponsored work. Otherwise, they could be working for you illegally.
Wow, thank you for those tips, Louis. Can we dive a bit deeper on compliance and what's causing the biggest problems in terms of compliance, in particularly areas that you are seeing that are leading to a lot of problems for license holders?
Sure. Yeah. So this is quite a big area, this area of sponsor license compliance, and the kind of areas that people are getting into trouble over. But I just thought I'd pick out some of the key areas that we're seeing. So the classic reason for getting into trouble with the Home Office, that could be like a license suspension or revocation, is failing to pay the salary stated on the COS. When you assign the COS, you put down what the individual worker's hours and pay is going to be. Now, I know that in reality, in real life, things fluctuate with the business. Maybe there's not the work there. So we're seeing sponsors reducing hours. So the individual's not getting paid as much. But unfortunately, you can't really get away with that. You need to be paying what the salary is on the COS. So you need to be careful about that, because the Home Office are very alert to underpayment there. It's a bit more to it. There are certain exceptions to the rule. So there are situations where someone can be paid less, especially if it's for reasons like maternity care or paternity. But the general rule is make sure you're paying what you said you would on the COS. Talked about right to work checks already. And I think because most of you, or maybe all of you, work at businesses which are CQC regulated, I think I tend to find care businesses are quite on top of right to work checks, but I do still see issues coming up. And one thing is just making sure the right to work checks are done before employment starts. So if you are doing a right to work check on that person's first day of work after 9 a.m., if they're starting at 9, that's actually not a valid right to work check because you've not done it before they start work. Another one they're big about is having a reliable system to diarise visa expiry dates. No doubt some people on this call, I feel, will be very sick of me banging on about this, but it simply is something they zoom in on and you have to be getting right. We always recommend you diarise both the visa expiry date and have a 3-month reminder. So say you've got Joe Bloggs's visa expires on the 1st of December. You need a diary system saying Joe Bloggs's visa expires on the 1st of December. But you also need one on November, October, 1st of September to say something like Joe Bloggs's visa expires in 3 months' time. So the Home Office don't say exactly what kind of system you need in place. That's just my interpretation, and I know that works. Another thing is not keeping a record of the worker's contact details. So you need to make sure you have a system of recording the worker's contact details and a system of updating your records with new contact details. So it sounds like a really small thing. I've seen people get their license suspended because they're not recording old contact details. They just have a system that overwrites the worker's addresses, for example, with the new address. They don't have the old address. So that's one part of it. The other part of this is you have to ensure the worker's contact details are, quote, always up to date. And the way I interpret that is just to make sure you're chasing the workers at least every 6 months. So that could just be a case of having a diarising system every 6 months to say, check all sponsored workers' contact details. You need to be checking their address, telephone number, email address, landline. If anyone still has a landline. Yeah, so if you're audited, you can then say, well, look, I've got this diary system. Oh, and look, I can show that every 6 months, these emails have been going out to the workers asking for the contact details. You've then done your bit. I mean, if people aren't responding or are not in fact updating you, that's not really the point. It's like, are you making proper efforts on your side? Okay, another area that's come up a few times, which is particularly for smaller care businesses, where in reality, care workers might be doing a little bit of other stuff. Just be careful about that, because if you're sponsoring under someone as a care worker, that's what their job should be. So I've had cases where the Home Office has taken exception to people doing a lot of, say, office admin. I think you can have a little bit of non-care work, but there has to be a little bit. But we've had problems where care workers have been interviewed and they've talked about how they're answering the phones and doing admin that's really not part of their job. So just be careful about that. And then the last point, I think I've kind of covered already, but inability to evidence a fair recruitment and selection process. So that's all the stuff I said before. Keep a good record of advertising, spreadsheets of who's applied and why they were rejected or selected, copy of interview notes, and keep a copy of people's CVs and applications as well. Okay, we're ready for the next one?
Thank you for explaining that all, Louis. How can understanding these rules be of advantage to everyone that's joined us here today?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, there's the kind of like stick and carrot thing, I guess. So if you're not following the kind of rules that I'm talking about, there's a real danger of losing your sponsor license. And if you're sponsoring in any kind of significant numbers at all, that can be devastating. So you could be talking about losing a significant part of your workforce. So I guess most people know this, but if your license is revoked, anyone who's sponsored then has to immediately, well, they meant to stop working for you, or they get 60 days. The visa's cut to 60 days. So yeah, obviously there's that side of stuff of protecting your existing workforce, but then there's also the flip side of that. Well, if you do stuff properly, I always say this: if you're doing everything by the book, well, you've got nothing to be scared of. and if the Home Office audit you, you should pass. So this gives you the opportunity to really grow your business based on sponsorship still. I do think you need to be careful not to get overloaded with sponsorship staff who are sponsored. So I'm not a CQC specialist, but I understand the CQC can get worried if businesses have a very high or a high proportion of sponsored workers. So kind of everything in moderation, but we've seen a lot of businesses really thrive by hiring these excellent care workers. And then the last point I was going to say is that actually there's been something in the news this morning saying, it's quite shocking actually, because some of you might have heard that there's talk about extending the route to indefinite leave to remain to ILR to 10 years. So that was always, so at the moment, you have to do 5 years of sponsorship and then you can qualify for indefinite leave to remain. And there had been talk for a while of increasing that to 10 years. So we kind of knew it was coming, but we didn't know whether that would apply. I thought that would only apply to people coming onto the route, so people starting sponsorship. But at the Labour Party conference, they've just announced that it's going to apply to people who are already being sponsored. So that is not good news for people who for the individuals, but from your business point of view, I'm just checking I got the maths right. That is right, yeah. So you can sponsor a new person. You can sponsor someone up until 2028, okay? Now, given that there's now a 10-year, or there will be a 10-year route to settlement, that means you can actually sponsor care workers until 2038. So although there's a kind of doom and gloom vibe to sponsorship of care workers, if you're doing stuff properly, you could be looking at sponsoring care workers up until 2038.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you for explaining everything with us, Louis. So just before we open the floor to any questions, I think is a good time to talk about how we can help you. It may be after today's webinar, you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed with everything and know that there's something you need help with. So please feel free to contact us at any time, whether that's today or in the future when you're having problems that are arising. I believe now would also be a convenient time to let you know about our other specialities as a firm, particularly our employment team, which I believe would be most relevant for everyone here today. Running a business while staying compliant is often complex and time consuming. And so on the slides is an area of some of the services that we can provide you with to help the continued smooth running of all of your businesses. Our employment team are experts in their field and they can help with a wide range of services, including contracts, disciplinary processes, managing redundancies, and any potential claims against yourself, such as unfair dismissal. Our employment team offers a really exciting retainer service, so you can pay a monthly subscription and get on-the-demand legal advice. So if you have any questions about those services or any at all, please just drop us an email. Now on to any questions. The floor is open. You can pop them in the chat if you don't want to speak. Jeanette, do you have a
someone's
question?
put the hand up. Someone's put the hand up. Or do we have to unmute?
Has it been confirmed? Has it been confirmed that it's changing to 10 years? I think we're talking about the ILR.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's. I read a report on Sky News where someone at the Labour Party conference was being pressed, and they said, yeah, it will apply retrospectively. I think that someone said, well, what if someone's on 4.5 years? Are they going to have to, even they? And after you tried to sort of not answer the question, but eventually said yes, they would have to. Oh, Bennett can't unmute. See if I can help you there. Oh, allow mic. There we go. Hopefully worked.
Thanks for that. Thanks for
Oh,
the
yeah.
webinar. Very interesting. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Just want to clarify. I'm pretty sure I heard, but just want. So you're saying if a candidate was with another sponsor and that sponsorship has been revoked, you're not they're not eligible. If you take them on, say for example, for 20 hours, you're breaking the law. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right.
Basically,
Because their sponsorship has been revoked.
well, if you actually look, can I share a different screen, Natasha, or is that too risky?
You can try.
Let's try to do it because we don't need our slides anymore, do we? So
Yeah. No.
I'm going to show you something. So this is the gov.uk website, which hopefully you can see in a second. Yeah, so this has always been the case that you can also work up to 20 hours a week in another job for your own business or for your own business, sorry, as long as you're still doing the job you're sponsored for. It's always said that as long as you're still doing the job you're sponsored for. Now, I always thought that, like, I'm sorry, you know, I don't want to be, I appreciate there's a lot of displaced care workers who are in a bad position. So I take no joy in sort of relaying this information. But I've always thought it's been fairly clear that you cannot do additional work if you've lost your sponsored job. And that's been, there is a court case that's come out where, yeah, the company got in trouble basically because they were giving 20 hours a week for someone who'd lost their main sponsorship, and the judge was very not on their side at all. And yeah, so be careful. I mean, is it something the Home Office are absolutely going after? Not that I'm aware of, but I would definitely be advising you to avoid that.
That's fine. Thanks for that clarification. Thanks.
Okay, no problem.
We've also just got another question in the chat, Louis. It's if someone is off sick and only entitled to statutory pay, how does the cause amount of 25k work? Do you have to pay them full pay even though they're not entitled to it?
No, if they're on statutory sick pay, that is a permitted reduction in pay. But what you've just got to make sure you're reporting that to the Home Office. Okay, so you leave a sponsor note, you report on that individual, and you've got to do that within 10 days. So just make sure you're leaving a report. Okay, but for statutory sick pay, that is one of the permitted exceptions. But you do, just a general note on kind of leaving reports, such as, you know, someone's on sick pay and their pay falls below what they're meant to be getting normally. You do have to be leaving reports and stuff like that. The Home Office, it looks weird if you're not leaving any reports, because that's not real life. So I would always encourage people to report stuff. And sometimes there's kind of like borderline ones you're not sure if you should report. There's no harm in doing that.
Right, perfect. Does anyone else have any questions for us today? No?
Yeah, that might be it. The other thing I'll say
Well,
is we do mock audits. So where we pretend to be the Home Office and come in and look under the car bonnet. So if any of you are interested in that, that can be quite helpful, just as a way of having confidence to know that your house is in order. But yeah, I think that looks like it. That's it, Natasha, yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you again for joining us. And if you have any questions, feel free to give us a shout. And we hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for joining. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.